Right, let's get this started, shall we? Welcome, everyone, to a series that's less about heartwarming tales of puppies and more about the underbelly of power, corruption, and spectacularly bad decisions. That's right, we're diving headfirst into the murky, often ludicrous world of government scandals. Now, you might be thinking, John, why dredge up these unpleasantries? Well, for starters, it's infinitely more entertaining than watching paint dry. But more importantly, these scandals, as messy and infuriating as they can be, reveal a lot about how power operates, how it's abused, and the often bizarre lengths people will go to hold on to it. Over the next few episodes, we'll be traveling through time and continents, unpacking some of the biggest, most jaw-dropping scandals that have rocked governments and left an indelible mark on history. We're talking about events so scandalous, they'd make your average soap opera plot seem downright tame. So buckle up, dear viewers. It's going to be a wild, eye-opening and possibly rage-inducing ride. But hey, at least you'll come out of it more informed, right? Or at least more cynical. Watergate. It's a name synonymous with political scandal, a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of power. But before it became shorthand for presidential wrongdoing, it was just a hotel. A pretty unremarkable one at that. Our story begins, as many ill-advised capers do, with a break-in. In 1972, 5 men were caught attempting to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters, located, you guessed it, in the Watergate complex. Now, you might think, a break-in? That's it? Oh. But my friends, this was no ordinary break-in. This, as the saying goes, was just the tip of the iceberg. The burglars, it turned out, were connected to President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign. And as the investigation unfolded, a tangled web of lies, cover-ups, and abuses of power began to unravel, ultimately leading to the highest office in the land. It's enough to make you wonder, what were they thinking? Were they really that incompetent? Or did they just think they were above the law? Spoiler alert, it was probably a bit of both. As the investigation into Watergate deepened, the scandal began to snowball. Tapes emerged of Nixon discussing the cover-up, implicating him in the obstruction of justice. The media, bless their hearts, had a field day. Imagine the 24-hour news cycle on steroids, fueled by typewriters and righteous indignation. The House of Representatives began impeachment proceedings against Nixon, charging him with obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the public's trust in their president had evaporated faster than a cheap bottle of vodka at a college party. Facing certain impeachment and removal from office, Nixon resigned in disgrace in 1974. In his resignation speech, he famously uttered the words, "I am not a crook." A bold statement, to be sure, but one that history has viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism. The Watergate scandal left an enduring scar on American politics, eroding public trust in government and forever changing the way we view the presidency. It's a stark reminder that even the most powerful person in the world is not above the law, and that even the most meticulously crafted lies eventually crumble under the weight of truth. All right, folks, buckle up, because we're about to delve into a scandal so convoluted, so mind-bogglingly complex that it would make even the most seasoned diplomat reach for a stiff drink and a lie-down. This, my friends, is the Iran-Contra affair. Picture this. It's the 1980s, the Cold War is still simmering, and the Reagan administration is facing a tricky situation. They desperately want to free American hostages held captive in Lebanon by Hezbollah, a group with ties to Iran. But there's a problem. The US has a strict arms embargo against Iran. Now, any sensible person would say, well, maybe we shouldn't arm a country that's holding our citizens hostage. But apparently that's not how things work in the shadowy world of international diplomacy. Instead, some bright sparks in the Reagan administration came up with a plan, a secret arms for hostages deal with Iran. It was a plan so audacious, so breathtakingly ill-advised that you almost have to admire the sheer audacity of it. Almost. As if selling arms to Iran wasn't bad enough, the Reagan administration decided to up the ante in a way that can only be described as utterly bonkers. They took the proceeds from the arms sales and secretly funneled them to the Contras, a rebel group fighting the socialist government in Nicaragua. The Iran-Contra affair exploded into a full-blown scandal when it was revealed to the public. Americans were outraged that their government was selling arms to a country that had sponsored terrorism and then using the money to fund a war they weren't supposed to be funding in the first place. The 1960s. A time of peace, love and... oh, right, the Cold War, and a scandal that could make even Austin Powers blush. John Profumo, Secretary of State for War, had an affair with Christine Keeler, who was also involved with the Soviet naval attaché. The Profumo affair rocked the British establishment. During the Cold War, John Profumo's scandal led to his resignation. It was a spectacular fall from grace. The scandal tarnished Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's reputation. Public trust in the government plummeted. The Profumo affair exposed the hypocrisy of the British elite. It was a sign that the old rules were changing. Let's be honest, no one likes paying taxes. It's like getting a root canal. But the world's wealthy elite play a different game. Enter the Panama Papers' 11.5 million leaked documents exposing offshore tax havens, a trove so large it needs a team of forensic accountants. Politicians, celebrities and billionaires hiding their wealth. A stark reminder that the rich play by different rules. The fallout from the Panama Papers was seismic. It was a global scandal implicating everyone from world leaders to celebrities. Like a family reunion where everyone hid their dirty laundry. Heads rolled, metaphorically speaking. The Icelandic Prime Minister resigned and others faced investigations. It was a public relations nightmare for those named. The Panama Papers sparked a global conversation. It highlighted income inequality and tax avoidance. The system favored the wealthy, leaving ordinary citizens to pay. It was a wake-up call for a fairer world. The legacy continues to shape our understanding of global finance. Brazil, a land of samba, sunshine, and apparently staggering levels of corruption. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't that a bit reductive? And to that, I say, have you heard about the Petrobras scandal? It's enough to make even the most cynical observer question the very nature of honesty in government. Petrobras, Brazil's state-owned oil giant, sounds like a superhero, right? Protecting the country, fueling the economy, maybe even wearing a tiny little cape. But in reality, it was more like a supervillain siphoning off billions of dollars in a corruption scheme so brazen it would make even a Wall Street banker blush. We're talking about inflated contracts, kickbacks to politicians, and enough money laundered to make a Swiss banker sweat through their monocle. It was like a real-life soap opera, with more backstabbing, betrayal, and questionable morals than an episode of The Real Housewives of Rio. The Petrobras scandal wasn't just a case of a few bad apples. It was a systemic rot that had infected the highest levels of Brazilian government and business. It was like finding out your friendly neighborhood baker was actually running an international drug cartel out of the back of his shop.
Check one, check.
When the Petrobras scandal hit, it was like a bomb going off in Brazilian politics. Tons of politicians were involved, even presidents and governors. Millions of people protested, demanding change. The scandal hurt Brazil's economy and Petrobras lost a ton of value. It was a wake-up call about corruption in a democracy. All right, let's talk about a scandal that rocked France to its core in the late 19th century, the Dreyfus Affair. Now, this wasn't just some salacious gossip about a politician and his mistress. This was a full-blown miscarriage of justice with a heaping side of anti-Semitism. Our story begins with Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish artillery officer in the French army. In 1894, he was accused of selling military secrets to Germany, a charge based on flimsy evidence, I might add. But hey, Who needs solid proof when you've got good old-fashioned prejudice, right? Dreyfus was court-martialed, found guilty, shocker, and sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island, a penal colony off the coast of South America. Talk about adding insult to injury. They even stripped him of his rank in a public ceremony, just to really rub salt in the wound. But here's the thing, the whole case was a sham. The real culprit was another officer, but the army, desperate to save face, covered it up. They even forged documents and suppressed evidence to keep Dreyfus imprisoned. So you're probably thinking, someone must have said something about this, right? This isn't fair. And you'd be totally right. A famous French writer, Émile Zola, wrote a really angry letter. It was called J'accuse, which means I accuse. He said the government was hiding the truth. Zola's letter was a huge deal. Everyone in France started talking about it. They argued about anti-Semitism, which is prejudice against Jewish people, and whether the government was doing the right thing. Some people really supported Dreyfus and others were totally against him. The country was split in two. This whole thing went on for years. There were more trials and people kept arguing back and forth. It showed how divided France really was. It also showed how much anti-Semitism there was, even in the government. Gap 2S. Finally, in 1906, Dreyfus was declared innocent. He even got his job back in the army. The Dreyfus affair became a really important example of how dangerous prejudice can be. It also showed how important it is to fight for what's right, even when it feels like everyone is against you. Well, folks, buckle up because we're about to dive headfirst into the roaring 20s with the Teapot Dome scandal. This doozy of a scandal involved oil, bribery, and enough shady dealings to make your head spin faster than a flapper on a dance floor. Picture this. Warren G. Harding is president and his administration is about as corrupt as a used car salesman with a toupee. We're talking cronyism, kickbacks, and a general disregard for ethical behavior. It's enough to make you yearn for the days of, well, basically any other presidency. At the heart of the scandal was Albert Fall, Harding's Secretary of the Interior. Now, Fall was supposed to be looking after the country's natural resources, but instead, he decided to treat them like his own personal piggy bank. Fall secretly leased the Teapot Dome oil reserve in Wyoming, along with 2 other oil fields, to private oil companies. And what did he get in return? Oh, just a few loans and gifts totaling around $400,000. I'm sure those were totally above board. Now you might think this kind of blatant corruption would go unnoticed, but you'd be wrong. The stench of scandal was so strong that even Congress couldn't ignore it. A Senate investigation was launched and the truth started to ooze out like crude oil from a busted pipeline. The investigation revealed a web of bribery, fraud and political favors that would make even the most jaded observer raise an eyebrow. It turned out Fall had been playing fast and loose with government resources, all while lining his own pockets. The Teapot Dome scandal became a symbol of the corruption that plagued the Harding administration. It eroded public trust in the government and tarnished Harding's legacy. Not that he had much of a legacy to tarnish in the first place. In the end, Fall became the first cabinet member to go to prison for crimes committed while in office. Justice was served, but the Teapot Dome scandal served as a stark reminder that power corrupts and oil, well, oil just makes things slippery. All right, folks, grab your calculators and put on your detective hats because we're delving into the Enron scandal. This was financial malfeasance on an epic scale. Enron, an energy giant, was once a shining example of American capitalism. They were the 7th largest company in the US. Their stock prices soared. But Enron was a house of cards built on accounting tricks. They were cooking the books, setting the kitchen on fire. Using mark-to-market accounting, they inflated profits. It's like claiming you're a millionaire because you might win the lottery. Now you might be wondering, how on earth did they get away with this for so long? Well, they had help. Arthur Andersen, their accounting firm, was complicit in the deception, signing off on Enron's fraudulent financial statements. They were like the getaway driver in this whole scheme, except instead of a ski mask, they wore pocket protectors. But like all good things, or in this case, incredibly shady things, Enron's charade eventually came crashing down. In 2001, a Wall Street analyst named Jim Chanos started raising questions about their accounting practices. He was like the kid in class who actually did the reading and pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. As more people began to scrutinize Enron's financials, the cracks in their facade became impossible to ignore. It turned out those sky-high profits were nothing more than smoke and mirrors, and the company was drowning in billions of dollars of hidden debt. In December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy, becoming one of the largest corporate collapses in American history. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and their life savings, and the scandal sent shockwaves through the financial world, exposing the dangers of unchecked corporate greed and the need for greater financial transparency. Volkswagen, the people's car company, or so we thought. Turns out their idea of people was limited to those who don't mind breathing in noxious fumes. You see, in 2015, the world discovered that Volkswagen wasn't quite the environmental champion it pretended to be. Remember those clean diesel cars they were hawking, those supposed marvels of German engineering that were meant to be both fuel efficient and environmentally friendly? Well, let's just say there was a bit of a software glitch. A tiny, insignificant software glitch that just happened to involve cheating on emissions tests. Millions of cars were fitted with software designed to detect when they were being tested and magically reduce emissions to legal levels. The rest of the time, they were pumping out nitrogen oxide, a pollutant linked to respiratory problems and smog, at levels up to 40 times higher than allowed. Volkswagen's response? A masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. Initially, they blamed a few rogue engineers, claiming it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But as the evidence mounted, they had to admit that yes, they had systematically deceived regulators and the public for years. The fallout was, to put it mildly, significant. Volkswagen faced billions of dollars in fines, lawsuits and recalls. Their reputation lay in tatters like a diesel engine sputtering its last breath. But here's the thing, this wasn't just about one company's greed. This scandal exposed a deeply troubling truth about the car industry's commitment to environmental regulations. It showed how easily these regulations could be circumvented and how profit often trumped public health. The Volkswagen scandal wasn't just an engineering failure, it was a moral one. It was a stark reminder that we can't simply trust corporations to do the right thing, especially when there's money to be made. And the worst part, the full impact of Volkswagen's deception in terms of environmental damage and public health is still being calculated. It's a sobering thought that we're only just beginning to understand the true cost of their lies. Now let's talk about a scandal that strikes at the heart of our digital lives, the Cambridge Analytica affair. Because nothing says democracy like having your personal data harvested and weaponized to manipulate your every political whim. It's like something out of a Black Mirror episode, but with less witty dialogue and more Mark Zuckerberg awkwardly drinking water. Cambridge Analytica, a now defunct political consulting firm, gained notoriety for its alleged role in influencing elections around the world. Their secret sauce, a potent cocktail of data analytics, psychological profiling, and good old-fashioned manipulation. They obtained data on millions of Facebook users without their consent through a seemingly harmless personality quiz app. This data, combined with other sources, allowed them to build detailed psychological profiles of voters, targeting them with personalized political messages designed to exploit their fears and prejudices. Facebook, the platform that allowed this data harvesting to occur, initially downplayed the incident, claiming it was a breach of trust by Cambridge Analytica alone. But as the story unfolded, it became clear that Facebook's own data privacy practices were, shall we say, a little loosey-goosey. The scandal sparked outrage around the world, raising serious questions about the power of tech giants, the vulnerability of our personal data, and the integrity of our democratic processes. Suddenly everyone was asking, what do these companies know about us? And how are they using that information? The Cambridge Analytica scandal wasn't just about data privacy, it was about the erosion of trust in our institutions and the very fabric of our democracy. It showed how easily our online lives could be manipulated and how vulnerable we are to the dark arts of digital persuasion. And while Facebook promised to do better, the damage was done. The scandal left a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that our digital lives were no longer entirely our own.
Breaking news.
Well, there you have it, a whirlwind tour of some of history's biggest government and corporate scandals. From Watergate to Volkswagen, these stories remind us that power, whether political or corporate, can be intoxicating, and that the pursuit of it can lead to some truly audacious acts of deception and betrayal. These scandals serve as cautionary tales, reminding us to be vigilant, to question authority, and to hold those in power accountable. Because as we've seen time and time again, those who forget the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most shocking events. See you next time.